This is the BBC.
Hello, this is the Word of Mouth podcast, and I'm Michael Rosen. On Word of Mouth, we talk about words and language and the weird and wonderful ways we're using them right now. For the first in this new series of Word of Mouth, I'm delighted to say that the comedian and writer Stephen Fry is joining me to talk about all things language. It's really our mutual obsession, isn't it, do you think? Fair to say that, Stephen?
Absolutely.
Is that lifelong for you?
Completely. I always think, I don't know how provable this is, that a lot of obsessions people have, a lot of skills, a lot of strengths are actually the shadows of weaknesses. That's to say, from a very early age, as soon as I went to school and was, mixing with other children, I realised that I was not musical. I couldn't sing. I couldn't dance. I couldn't really move my body in any way that wasn't laughable. I couldn't run in a straight line without going into a tree or something. Yes. I couldn't catch a ball. I couldn't throw a ball. Yes. I couldn't draw. I couldn't paint. There was almost every single accomplishment of which, one might be proud was barred from me, except speech. And so it took me a long time to have any confidence in anything, because I knew I was good at language. I knew I could do compositions. When you're very young, you're asked to do compositions. I knew I could parody and pastiche very accurately and tell stories.
But now, what does it mean to you? Why is it important? Why are you fascinated with this stuff that is, after all, only really a kind of form of behaviour, isn't it? But
yes,
clearly
it is.
You're
I think
fascinated.
It is our cultural DNA. It is as much part of who we are as our tribal behaviour, as our ability to fall in love, as our need for all kinds of, part of our social evolution was language. And as you know, is a very recent thing, 50 to 70,000 years ago.
It's incredible to think that, isn't it? So recent.
And writing even more
I was looking at an axe head on the BBC website, and it said it was 350,000 years old. So these hominids were making these axes, but we don't think they had language.
No.
It's incredible.
No. By the time they were making these tools and harnessing fire, our ancestors were us. We could go back in time and mate with them without any problem, which is sort of the kind of biological definition of being the same species, not the total one. I'm sure people will know. But language, as you say, 50,000 years is just pinprick nothing. Exactly. I mean, if our lives in the common sort of metaphors we like to are a 24-hour period, then we would we learned to speak at 11:30 at night. Kind of thing, and we learned to write about 2 minutes ago. Our alphabet, certainly the Cadmean alphabet, as the Greeks call it, the Phoenician alphabet that spread then across to become the Cyrillic and the Greek and the Latin is only 5,000 or 6,000 years old. I mean, that was just
while we were walking up the stairs, wasn't it?
Yes, that's after Homer. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's after Linear B. It's very recent, and that's the so
that's the discovery of the alphabetic principle.
What it means to me is that. I mean, again, I have to sort of go back because I was quite facile in every sense, both the complementary and the non-complementary sense at languages. I was, and liked Latin. I was asked if I wanted to learn Greek when I was about 8 because I was picking up Latin quite quickly. And I loved it because it was like a code. I taught friends what the Greek letters were, so we would send each other letters in English but written in Greek characters. And,
I like that.
But I remember a book, you'll love this, I think. I became fascinated by derivation, by etymology. So, phonane and to speak, and telephone, and the tele being remote or at a distance. And so we had all those telegram from grammain to write and so on. And it would always say in this book, we can remember this because of this Greek word coming into English. And I loved this, seeing them. Oh, I see. And then I remember in about chapter 9, there was a new verb, thaumazo. And it said, this is easily remembered by thinking of the English word thaumaturge. I was like 8 years old. I was taking thaumaturge. I had to rush off to a dictionary. Of course, I've never forgotten it.
No, what is it? I don't know.
Thaumaturge is a miracle worker, a wonder worker, a worker of marvels. Urge as in dramaturge, work, ergos,
we need them, don't
thauma, yes, indeed, yeah. So I had this terrific sense of how you could reach back in time through language. I remember.
Well, it's a museum, isn't it?
Yes. And here's an interesting one. I think this is so important. I think it's actually rather moving. The hearth and the heart are the same word. They're cognate.
The heart of the home, the hearth of the home.
And in Greek, the word for hearth is cardia, as in cardiology and cardiac. So it's the same. You know what the Latin for hearth is?
Go on.
Focus.
And focus.
And we've taken focus as a metaphor to mean anything around which we concentrate.
Yeah.
And for our ancestors, of course, it was just about the heart of who they were, how they bonded as families, as groups, and then as clans, and then as tribes, and so on, as around a fire, telling each other stories, telling each other how they came to be, building up myth, building up stories of...
And it's almost as if the sensibility is hop from one language to another, or simultaneous evolution, or a mixture of both.
Yes, exactly. And so we have that phrases like hearth and home, because they, exactly, in all their cultures, they recognise that same thing. That's not a hendiadys, is it?
I don't know what a hendiadys. If you tell me what that one is, yes.
I think that is hearth and home. Yes, I think it's a hendiadys.
What is that?
Well, it's literally just Greek for 1 through 2. It's, you say two things when you mean one.
Spick and span.
Yes, king and country. It really just means your country, but
I like
there's
that.
a sort of rhythmic way of saying it as two things.
Now, I've been reading your book, The Ode Less Travelled. This is a kind of encyclopedic road trip, we could call it that, round poetic forms. You got interested in the idea that in poetry that there are rhythms that are kind of to do with the speech rhythm, but then we have our iambs and our dactyls and our spondies and anapaests and all these sorts of things, but that we find satisfying in English, perhaps in other languages as well, that if a poem ends with a da-da-da-da,
yes,
that if there's that little rhythm, so you can have a tumty-tum to tiddly ta-da-da-tum or something, that we like these things and these patterns.
And I remember hearing someone, I called someone up in the days before, the current voicemail, and it said, I haven't time to take your call right now, so leave a message when you hear the tone. And I realised that was 2 perfect iambic pentameters.
Yes.
And it just fits the English voice, supposedly, the French can take an Alexandrian, a hexameter, slightly one extra beat, as it were, a pair of beats, and we can't. It's a very interesting idea. And the ballad form, of course, I loved the fact when it becomes actually non-verbal. I used to do at school, I again, this is part of the word thing, I suppose, where all my friends had rock and roll albums, I had British music hall and comedy albums.
Right.
So
who was your favourite?
Rob Wilton, I think, by a long way. I loved him.
What did he sing?
Rob Wilton, he'd have a finger in his lip and he would speak. The day war broke out. And what I loved about him was the rhythm. He had do little rhymes like he'd have some aggressive situation. He said, he said, who? He said, you. He said, yes. He said, you. I said, oh. And that sort of thing. And I'd end up doing actual verses. And you could actually just do that rhythm. That's right. I said, he said, you. I said, all that. Yes, he said, I love all that. There's something very, very primal about it. It's a beat, and people say that the iamb or the ballad represents the heartbeat very well, and maybe that's true.
And yet you think of rap. And then rap's created another heartbeat, which is basically a 4-beat line. Ta-ta-pum, 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 ta-ta-pum. And then you can play around with it and have ta-ta-pum, ta-ta-pum. But the words, and they just flows. Guys can just improv around it. I mean, you must love that.
I do. I think it's fantastic. And some of them are really extraordinary. Kendrick Lamar, I think, is a genius. Eminem's a genius. I mean, I know it sounds awful.
No, I think so.
Ancient white figure. But there's no doubt there is extraordinary skill and something deeply satisfying.
And so percussive with Eminem. To get that, call it alliteration, whatever, but on the plosives, it's fantastic. Yeah. So all the anger can be put into the consonants.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Exactly. In a way, all words are onomatopoeic, can't they, in a strange sort of way.
Let's talk about comedy. Maybe some people, first time we saw you as a sort of comedic figure was in a bit of Fry and Laurie. Yeah. I just wonder, I used to like writing sketches at university. What sensibility is that? Because you've described yourself, in this world of language, and you've now just heard a little bit about music hall and so on. What got you into writing sketches? Because sketches, you have to sort of be in yourself, but outside of yourself. You have to find comic situations, absurdities and so on. Where did that come from?
Well, I'd written a play in my second year, which was a comedy, and it went to Edinburgh, and it did quite well. It won sort of prize. And Emma Thompson, who was the same year as me and reading the same subject in English literature, so we were friends, she came to see it, and she brought round a friend of hers, this rather sort of tall, looming figure with rather wonderful scarlet triangles on his cheeks, as young men often do, especially ones who are very fit, as he was. And he introduced himself as Hugh Laurie. Hello, he said, and I said hello. And then at the beginning of the next term, I went to his rooms and we started writing sketches together just instantly. It was extraordinary. I mean, literally, I went into his room and he had a guitar and he said, "I've just been writing this song." And we worked on the lyrics of it together and we finished that and then we just started writing a sketch and then another one. And we never stopped. We always had, it was like a comedic love at first sight. We absolutely, and where I was verbal, he was, not that he's in any way verbally incompetent, quite the reverse, but he was much more to do with pictures and the physical and the face and obviously musical and other such things, and being silent and reactive in some moments. And I was a kind of blizzard of verbiage. So some of our early sketches exactly, and in fact we did one which was basically about linguistics. It was
the profs. Is it?
Yeah. Yes. We sort of. I talked to him about language, about and I say, listen to me. 88 notes on a piano keyboard, and yet I can play in an order that has never been heard before. And the same with language. Just a few words, and I can say, "Hold the newsreader's nose squarely, Timothy, or friendly milk will countermand my trousers." Perfectly normal words, but never before in the history of our species put in that order. And yet, we spend all our days saying the same thing. "I hate you, listen to me, shut up, Marjorie's dead," and so on. And then I started going into this thing which was basically trying to be funny about the Chomskyan competence, the idea of linguistic competence.
Didn't he had green dreams, sleep furiously, didn't he?
Yes, that's right.
I think that was
the same
his
sort of idea.
Yes.
It was a very popular sketch. I still get notes about it because all these things are obviously on YouTube.
Let's come back to telly. You on QI. I think, did you find that people thought that you knew all that stuff, that you knew it
correctly?
Oh,
Yes.
of course, yes. There were no notes. You had nothing on auto cue. It just bubbled out of your head. You just happened to know how many fleas there are in the world. You just knew
that's
that.
it. Absolutely.
And poor old Alan Davis, he knew none of it, and then the odd comedian surprisingly did.
Yeah.
And that was how it worked. But is that fun? Is it fun to be known as this kind of, if you like, genius of esoterica, even though perhaps sometimes it was a little bit of a cheat?
It's a bit silly. I mean, I kind of played into it by allowing it to feel almost like a classroom of disruptive kids who disobeyed Sir and flicked V's at him when his back was turned and so on, and tried to restore order. But yeah, I would go in the middle of the afternoon and there would be the questions and cards, and I would spend the time, trying to get behind all the information. There was nothing written up on the autocue except links, so I did have to short-term memorise the facts, so I knew them.
That's an achievement in itself, Stephen. Yes,
but no, I liked the fact that so many young kids and indeed old people would write to me and say how excited they were to see a programme where it was all right to know things. It was actually okay to know things and
to be funny about them, even though it was quite serious.
Exactly, and that it's a thing that sometimes people forget, that being funny about something is not a sign of dismissing it, mocking it, or not taking it seriously.
A hard point to make, sir, might I say.
Yes.
In the children's book world, I struggle to, if you like, put up a voice for funny books, because after all, we love serious books. Why not? Yeah. But also to say that funny books have also got something to say, I find quite a hard point to make.
Exactly, and Oscar Wilde rightly said of someone, he has no sense of humour because he is simply not serious enough. If you take the world seriously, you address it, you see it for all its truths, and there's bound to be a huge amount of humour there.
There's a nice little one from Charlie Chaplin as well, something the idea that all comedy is based in pain, I think he says. So the idea that actually if you go right back to the root of it, there's going to be some pain somewhere, and then you build on it and find the funny. So to a certain extent, you escape from the pain, but it's reflecting it.
And I like the Chesterton, the G.K. Chesterton attitude, which is that any abstract statement should be tested on the anvil of experience and reality. For example, there was
tell the education system that.
Yes.
Should we just phone that through?
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
There was a good essay he wrote about drama, the current drama, and he said, I saw in the newspaper the other day this sentence: "At the trumpet call of Ibsen and Shaw, modern woman rises to take her place in society. And I thought to myself, well, that's good to know. I said, now, who do I know who's a modern woman? Oh, Mrs. Wilkinson, who comes in and scrubs my floors on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She lives in Clapham. She's 37. She's a modern woman. So I say to myself, at the trumpet call of Ibsen and Shaw, Mrs. Wilkinson rises to take her place in society. I realise the sentence is not only nonsense, it's pernicious nonsense.
Now, one of the times I've seen you most angry, yes, actually beyond anger, I think, may I think it was despair, really. It was in your BBC Two doc, Out There.
Oh, yes.
And I watched there, and you went to Uganda and you confronted people in government about their anti-gay laws. And I guess you would admit this, your fluency broke down, didn't it?
It did,
I can
completely.
see you now in my mind's eye. You're there talking to, I think he was a minister, wasn't he? And you sort of went a bit Melchett. You went a bit buff, and you...
I wish I'd been more sane and level about it. The whole purpose of the documentary was to look at homophobia around the world and to see where it came from and how it was harming people, or whether there was a chance of it being somehow muted or modified. I have a very cushioned life, to be honest, Michael, and therefore I had never really looked in the face of hatred, antagonism, enmity of such a vituperative kind. There were three examples. One was in Kampala in Uganda. Another was in St. Petersburg, where I met a politician there who was responsible for a new law that applied to St. Petersburg that was since then moved by the Duma to the whole of federal Russia. And then the other place was a senator in Brazil. And I looked into his eyes and I really saw something that made me very cold and frightened. And I won't say I got him, but he was going on about homosexuality, and he was incredibly strong about it. And he said, no, what you have to remember is families. It's just not natural. So I said to him, well, it's funny you should say that, because before coming out here, I made great effort to speak to zoologist friends of mine who say that there's probably, at the minimum, 185 species of animal where homosexual behaviour has been observed on a regular basis. But there's only one species of animal where homophobic behaviour has ever been observed, and that's the human race. And then he stood up, and his two security guards came forward and stared at me, and he just went blah, like that and left. And I thought, if there wasn't a camera, he would have set them on me. I'd never seen such hatred in a face directed at me. And it's, I admit it's a privileged position not to have been in that position. But, maybe if I was an Arsenal fan at a Spurs match, I would be used to it every week. But it's pretty worrying to see that.
But in a sense, you used, though, there, I can hear, you used the fact that you had some access to scientific knowledge.
I got it out there, yeah.
You're playing with that word nature. He said natural.
Yeah,
you're saying,
exactly.
OK, well, I've been off to nature. I've gone and had a little chat with nature and found this out. And at the same time, you've delivered it in a nice piece of rhetorical prose to him. So, it all came together for you.
That moment was as I like to think I won, even though I was still very frightened. The other two, I lost it. In Kampala, I was deeply miserable and unhappy. And
I could see that.
So distressed by it, and didn't know how to respond to the...
But in a way, that's powerful as well, because we know you as the other Stephen. We know the Stephen that isn't like that. And so, in a sense, finally, you were broken down by it, which, anyone rational watching it could see that, and we might just as well have been in a similar situation, that it might have broken us down.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember those moments, because it is a very interesting period we're in now where... the whole nature of identity politics is being questioned, and it's always good to question anything, so I'm not against that. And I can see how some people find it tiresome beyond belief that everyone wants to retreat into the sexuality or gender or race or whatever it is that they
all got lots of words, isn't it? There's hundreds of words are proliferated by this identity politics, which...
Because I don't identify as
inside
gay,
it.
I identify as Stephen.
Yes.
That's about as far as I'm prepared to go. But I know some people do like this idea of identifying as ... as part of a community, and I know that plenty of other people hear that and find it deeply annoying, deeply distressing, and yet I only have to think back to... there was a newspaper in Kampala, that's one of the things I still hadn't recovered from when talking to this minister, that had published the faces of gay people on it. these are the gays who are trying to corrupt your children. So I sort of bear that in mind when I hear someone going perhaps a bit too far down the identity avenue. I kind of think, well, yes, but I'd rather a bit too much of that than too much of the other.
And where do you think we're going with language? We've talked about identity politics and so on, and your love of this huge, great museum of language that hangs over every word, that sort of behind every word there is this museum and so on. Are we going, in your view, are we becoming simpler with it, becoming more technical? Do you see a kind of demagogy perhaps taking over the way we speak?
I think, I'm sure you share this with me. I think everyone who's really passionate about language and has tried to study it and in all its various ways, language and languages and the use of language and so on, is a lot less pessimistic than some people are. I don't despair of the young person's use of language in terms of abbreviations and internet language and all the rest of it. I see that as
quite a technophile, aren't you?
I love the technological side of it, but also I don't mind the misspellings and so on that go on in deliberate misspellings that go on in text language and the emojis and everything else. I see that as no different to the arrival of the blue jeans in the 1950s. Language is not a stable, fixed thing. It moves all the time. And I don't just mean it moves historically. I mean it moves within people. So that just as someone who owns jeans and shorts and weird punk clothes can do that in their spare time, when it comes to a job interview, they know how to put a suit on. And young people, yes, they may use weird language and say like a lot and all the things that make, I think, idiot pedants angry. But when they go for a job interview, they're perfectly capable of speaking a slightly better level. And when they're writing emails or doing, the glory of language is that it is a hugely rich thing, and particularly the glory of our language. We're sitting in London, as it happens here, and I often compare English language to London, in as much as Paris famously was planned, the Haussmann's plan, and because for various reasons they weren't invaded or bombed by Germany in the way that London was, they've kept a kind of perfect, almost pristine sense of its medieval Ile de la Cité and then the Haussmann's boulevards. Absolutely perfect, and famously with their language too. They have the Académie Française that supposedly protects it against the invasional wash of English and other such languages coming over. We have no such protection, and London is also a completely mismatched higgledy-piggledy. You go down the city and there's an Elizabethan building, or there's an even earlier building, a medieval building, and next to it is a great glass construction. And similarly, in every sentence we utter, there's a bit of Australian slang, there's a bit of American jazz slang, there's a bit of street black slang, there's a bit of convict, a bit of prison, a bit of legal, a bit of Shakespeare, a bit of Milton, a bit of Dickens, a bit of P.G. Wodehouse, a bit of modern comedy, a bit of rock and roll. All these discourses jostle together in a single sentence in English, in the same way that a single street is a mixture of architectures. I think it's a wonderfully valuable thing, terrific thing. And the idea of all speaking in some supposedly perfect way, apart from it being historically ignorant, because there is no period in which there has been written English in which some people haven't bemoaned its erosion and disappointment. I mean, for example, people think that language use gets lazier and lazier. In fact, it's the reverse, generally speaking. A good example are those, I think they call them like the progressive present. Think of Christ on the cross, for example. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's St. James. That's simple and clear. We actually have complicated it. We would never say, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. We'd say, Father, forgive them, they do not know what they are doing. Two different forms of progressive present. The one that puts in a do, which no other, French and German and Italian don't do that. If you say, do you know where you're going? They just say, know you where you go.
Yes.
But we put these extra verbs in. Do you know where you are going? And that's quite recent.
Yes.
So this idea that we just lazily drop stuff.
Stephen, your enthusiasm for modern technology is very, very well known. We know about it. But do you think modern technology has helped us communicate, helped you communicate?
I do, and I'll give you a reason for this, and that is, I think the telephone was a really annoying blip in our communications, and that's old technology. I mean, that's 1880s, 90s. When you're on the telephone to someone, especially if you're British, that Bernard Shaw thing of, the moment one Englishman opens his mouth, another Englishman despises him. When you're speaking to someone on the telephone, all the age, class, education, vocabulary all come into play because it's in real time. And it's embarrassing. And I hate being on the telephone to people, especially strangers in shops and things like that, because it's embarrassing and awkward.
You think they're making judgments on you that may not be valid?
Or they might think I'm making judgments on them, and so on, and back and forth. Whereas the moment it becomes literary, and I don't mean in any sense glorified literary, I just mean written, whether it's a text or a message of some kind or an email, you can go back and you can think about it. And I can remember when I first got email, which was in the 80s, late 80s, before there was, World Wide Web or anything. And it was only communicating with the odd kind of nerd in Spokane, Washington, or Melbourne, Australia. And we would email each other about, how to tweak our subnet mask or some other geeky thing. But occasionally the email would break down and we'd phone each other. And having had ironic, funny, amusing emails, suddenly on the phone it's kind of, yes, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll get back to you. And because the social of having to speak to someone is so difficult, so fraught and freighted and just, loaded with all kinds of embarrassments. Whereas when you write, even people who don't think of themselves as literary in that sense, they come up with wonderful, ironizing, brilliant, clever little, tropes and formulations in language which are just blissful.
Little quips, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think people have noticed how clever people are at texts and at writing and of seeing the subtlety in writing. And if you phone them, unless it's family members where you can just sort of drop any pretenses.
I mean, I'm not going to claim it's for the greatest witticism of all, but when I'm coming home, I text my wife and I go past the Hornsey Health Centre. Right. But I never call it that, of course. I always call it the Hornsey Elf Centre, obviously. So sometimes that's now reduced to elves.
Very good.
So now all I text is elves, meaning I'm at the health centre.
Brilliant.
Going past the health centre.
See, I love things like that.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, so I think technology has helped us communicate, but not in the way that you might expect.
Stephen Fry, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the Word of Mouth podcast. I hope you enjoyed the programme. If you did, please subscribe and recommend us to your friends and give us a review or rating on your podcast provider. It all helps spread the word. Thanks again for listening.